What is going on, you guys? We're back. This time we're gonna be doing more of the Disney Brain. Another requested reaction. This one is going to be about Dino Thunder. Yes, we're gonna get back to Dino Thunder. And honestly, I like doing this now because now that we've done History of Power Rangers throughout these seasons, we can get back to um, the rest of the seasons that we did and just talk about it a little bit more. So, sorry about that. Just got up from my nap. Let's have a look at this.
Hello, Internet. I'm the Disney Brain, finally delivering what is probably the most requested video I'll ever make. Power Rangers Dino Thunder is a very special season in several respects. The first thing to mention is that it truly is a legacy season in many ways. But I don't say that to downplay the unique ideas and angles it brings. I say that because it features ideas created from the lore of Power Rangers as a whole.
Yeah.
The return of Dino-based powers, the return of Tommy himself, just to name a few. Where Megaforce was a season built on ham-fisted fan service, Dino Thunder was a season built on understanding the past, respecting the past, utilizing it, but not being overly defined by it, as we'll discuss. So, with all that said, let's jump right in and first discuss the two-part opener, Day of the Dino, the episode title being the first of many throwback references. In this opener, we're immediately treated to the return of Ranger icon Tommy Oliver, back in the main cast for the first time since the Turbo Power Transfer. Here's the first thing of many things that Dino Thunder gets right. They don't just throw Tommy at us as a cheap way to learn old school fans, no. They give him an effective backstory, which in turn gives him a real reason to be part of the current story. And they add depth by digging into his relationship with other characters, namely Anton Mercer. And it makes total sense that after his former place of employment literally blows up and then sinks, that he be forced into a more low-key profession. So, in a sequence of events that I can only call Breakfast Club, we meet our three main characters, who all get the attention at the same time. But, as usual, we'll get to the characters a little bit later. So, Tommy decides to cancel detention if the trio can find some artifacts. So, naturally, they fall into a sinkhole and discover three very important artifacts. This gives us our introduction to the unmorphed powers, which some people seem to have a problem with, even though it's not actually a problem. The idea of unmorphed powers aren't at all new.
No, they're not.
Trip and Petey from Time Force both had supernatural abilities they could call upon while unmorphed. Both Maya and Cole had an innate ability to connect to nature and communicate with non-human creatures.
Exactly.
And, more to the point, the unmorphed powers here, and in all those other cases, are never abused to the point where they are ever on the same level as, or could ever take the place of, morphing. And yes, that same logic applies to SBD and their powers as well. And beyond that, there's really not too much to say about the unmorphed powers in general. If anything, it's actually confusing that they aren't used more often, given how many problems they could have solved. But moving on. So, the episode ends with Kira not wanting to take part in this freaky new world, but soon getting kidnapped. Then, part 2 begins with Tommy and the guys trying to find the captured Kira. Tommy explains that when his old colleague Anton Mercer vanished, that's when Mesogog appeared, setting up a fairly obvious reveal for later. But it's more important because it does well to set up Mesogog in relation to Tommy as the primary incident that brought him to Reefside. He's not just some random evil warlord or some space pirate out for domination, he matters narratively. And the fact of the matter is, Tommy is in part responsible for Mesogog's creation as well as the Tyrannodromes, to say nothing of Beltrax's reveal later. Even though this season doesn't operate with a ton of moral ambiguity on the side of Tommy, which is kind of a mischance as far as I'm concerned, the villain side of things is made far more interesting, knowing that the face of the franchise helped create the threats this time. A similar narrative would go on to work even better when RPM handled it years later. So, the trio of kids are now given new morphers and are asked to tame dinosaurs, which goes well. And instead of your standard fair kaiju battle, we get the Megazord literally drilling a hole through a spaceship. I usually never have anything to say about the Zords because most of them don't really add much to the story, but that's a proper introduction. And so, the two-part pilot ends with Tommy entrusting the powers to a brand new team of heroes.
Now, I'll say this. When I saw that episode, the two-parter, right? And I saw that Megazord drill that hole and calling them forming the Megazord, the Dino Megazord, the Dino Thunder Megazord. while Knight was showing like and all that, and him just telling them how to do it and what to do. I enjoyed that. I really did. That made me like this series a lot more, especially the whole thing about Dino Thunder. So
He says, when you work together, nobody can beat you. A statement that carries a great deal of weight, since the guy saying it has been through countless battles, both figuratively and literally. And that is one of the many reasons that the now Dr. Oliver works so well as a Ranger mentor, in addition to a Ranger himself in Dino Thunder. Episode 3, Wave Goodbye, marks an important next step for Connor as a character, as well as introducing us to Haley and Trent. In that episode, Connor recognizes the importance of being a Ranger and realizes that other priorities have to take a back seat for this hero stuff to bear fruit. A Team Unites tried to do this with Mike in Samurai, but it doesn't work there because they made it the first episode that premiered for some dumb reason.
Yeah.
Tackling priorities makes sense as an early character hurdle, but not as early as the first episode. But with this being episode 3, it works a lot better because we have an initial understanding of all the main characters now. So, Connor resigns for a bit because of course he would. He's a teenager, and he probably thinks soccer and girls are the only thing that matters. But then he realizes why this matters. Connor doesn't start off or even end as the best character in the world, but he does grow, change, learn as time marches forward. Dino Thunder has an interesting opening structure defining its first 5 episodes, including having one of the most engaging clip shows ever created. This is important, not just as a Tommy narrated history lesson, but as a way for the current team to literally learn the legacy of power.
Yeah.
Time Force, understanding the characters, including Rancic early on, gave context to their development and the season, because that's the point of it all. Dino Thunder, as I mentioned, is a season built on not just embracing the past, but understanding it, all while making your own definitive mark on the franchise, which then leads into Back in Black, which sees Tommy return as the 4th Ranger on the team. I've talked before about how some of the best seasons operate patiently, slowly building their teams person by person, and Dino Thunder is a good example of that. We knew Tommy was going to suit up again the second episode 1 aired.
I was hoping for it.
They still gave space for the trio of teens to be properly introduced first. Additionally,
like real shit. Hold on, right here. Wait a minute. When I saw him morph like that, I immediately wanted that action figure. I immediately wanted it. What Saban had done after. Well, no, but before they did RPM, what they were doing was incredible when they were aligned with Disney, because they knew how to market Power Rangers to us. So it was really like always pissing me off when we was doing the videos and LeCar was saying this and that about why they couldn't do this, why they couldn't do that. Because Power Rangers is such a big thing that not many people realize it. Even you guys who watch my videos, Epic Fable reviews, another person that always comments that, dude, it's just a kid show, it's not really that big. Yes, the fuck it is. Power Rangers is another gigantic property, along with Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Batman, all them other things. And it doesn't make sense that people still treat it like it's not, because it is. How is it that Power Rangers, for some reason, just does not get that same insight as all these other franchises? It's been like I like. Is it the fact that like it came from the 90s, not the 80s? Is it the fact that it didn't come from like it's not that old enough? I don't understand it. I just don't understand it. Power Rangers is a big thing. And when I saw this, I was immediately, my jaw dropped to the floor. As a kid, I loved it. I loved it so much. Regardless of the fact that there may have been Sentai footage or whatever. Like, come on, y'all.
But they still gave space for the trio of teens to be properly introduced first. Additionally, Trent first appears in episode 3, but it then takes several more episodes before the excellent 3-parter White Thunder begins. and calling it a three-parter is actually somewhat misleading, because his arc doesn't just stop with the extraction of his evil side. Several seasons also get this right, see again RPM, but this season has a certain self-aware charm to it that makes it work better than most, even going so far as to call Tommy too old for this. Now, whether you agree with Elsa or not, the fact that the show was comfortable enough with itself to make a point about bringing it up is exactly my point. The initial 5 episodes of Dino Thunder make 2 things exceptionally clear. 1, that this season was looking to balance being its own unique entry in the series with being an entry predicated on the past to some degree, and 2, that if nothing else, it was damn sure going to succeed in carrying out point 1. Dino Thunder is not lazy, it's not pandering, and it doesn't offend your intelligence by barely offering you anything in the way of plot progression or real growth.
Exactly.
Its referential nature doesn't hurt it, it helps it, and that's exactly what a Legacy season needs to get right. And now, let's discuss the characters and how they fit into everything. Kira Ford is someone I've called one of the most uniquely realized Rangers in history, and I stand by that. Her musical acumen and punk rock aesthetic is unlike anything we've seen before or since, but it really works for this reason. It's kind of a good time capsule. I don't know for sure if Rangers took inspiration from an on-the-rise Canadian musical star to create
Probably
the character
did.
of Kira, but it sure feels like they might have. The Mighty Morphin Power Rangers were very much a product of their time.
Yeah.
From the goofiness to the fashion sense to the priorities and actions of the characters thereof.
They were
In that
90s.
same
They
vein,
were the 90s
Dino Thunder
people.
is also a product of its time by
Yeah.
introducing 3 teens also with attitudes, but with very different ones.
Exactly.
You can find characters like Ethan and Connor in most recent time periods, so I think Kira symbolizes this early 2000s era best, and she is also a great example of a non-traditional hero type who is forced to change for the better because she's called upon to do so. Both her and Connor go through that, and it makes sense because they both have clearly defined priorities prior to becoming Rangers, and learning how important their job is fits right into the narrative of understanding the legacy of power, a legacy that includes a vast number of individuals who had to make those same sacrifices. Ethan is a fully realized geek, which I say fondly, of course, because I can relate to that. His character is more of a direct parallel to Mighty Morphin, given the fact that Billy, the former wielder of Triceratops' power, was also the brains of the group. Ethan doesn't prove to be as useful as Billy was, but Dino Thunder really allows him to be, which is to say, between gaming competitions and his at times sarcastic tones towards people he deems less bright, they do a great job at nailing what this kind of character would act like. He's a fairly standard Ranger, but, as I constantly emphasize, he's a better character, and that's more important. There's not really a ton to say about him, he just really works in this setting, given everything he is and proves to be, and everything he has to deal with because of that.
He's his own
including
character.
bullying. Ethan, for me, proves to be one of the better Blue Rangers out there. Connor is by no means a brainy individual, which Ethan loves to point out at various times. And he's also not exactly the best person either, but as I mentioned, he does learn and grow along the way. There's a subtlety in the way he becomes somewhat more mature as the season progresses, and if you don't include the physical transformations of the Mercer men, he might actually be the most developed character here. That makes sense with him being the Red Ranger on this team, but with Tommy around, Connor could have easily turned into Rocky 2.0 and had little to no impact on the story. He doesn't fall into that trap, but even when it's all said and done, it would be a stretch to call him a top 10 Red Ranger. But since that field is pretty stacked anyways, that's not really a knock against him. He's good, but because of Tommy's commanding presence as not just a Ranger, but the Ranger, Connor always struck me as having more of a Green Ranger characterization than a Red most of the time. He does have flashes of really good leadership, but it's never enough to confuse him with the likes of Wes Collins, who also starts in a less powerful position, but becomes more of a co-captain and a true leader later on. For as much as I like Connor and what he did and what he brought to the season, I wouldn't ever say he took that kind of step forward. But I also don't think that's a huge issue, since the storylines and structure of Dino Thunder do a lot of the heavy lifting here. Before we get to the other main characters, I wanted to briefly discuss the importance of Cassidy Cornell. I wouldn't call her an exceptional supporting character, but her, and Devin to a lesser degree, are given just enough focus to matter. Her whole thing is becoming a reporter, and to the show's credit, they actually give her the chance to do just that. It's not just a side gimmick either, it's her actual career aspiration and it matters to her. But not as much as potentially ruining the lives of her friends, a sense of integrity she develops through the course of the show. If she's just annoying to you, I wouldn't disagree, but she also has a ton of positive traits, including a fearless approach to journalism seen as early as episode 2, an invaluable trait in that particular field. Cassidy Cornell is many things, but she's not lazy, neither in personality nor as a character created for this show. Something I can't really say about the most recent season of Rangers and their human side characters. And what other pair do we know that originally wanted to expose the Rangers, but then, through their development, ended up doing right by them? Exactly. But again,
yeah.
Cassidy and Devin are their own characters, and surprisingly strong ones at that. With Trent Mercer, we get the Dino Thunder equivalent of the game-changing Green with Evil saga that stands as one of the best aspects of the original season.
Yeah,
And
Trent
again,
was cool.
You see the theme taking shape of understanding the past, but also making your own present. Trent's struggles are interesting because they are inherently different than what Tommy struggled with back in the day. Tommy was under Rita's spell, pure and simple, but with Trent, it was more of a Jekyll and Hyde psychological horror.
Yeah, it was all by
A natural
accident.
parallel to his father, who has the same type of duality going on with him and Mesogog. And from this stems a sickness in Trent, a desperation. He doesn't want to hurt anyone, but he has no control over when and how the evil White Ranger powers manifest, which then gives Kira the vital responsibility of confidant, someone who Trent trusts and can hopefully help him. Of course, things don't go that smoothly, and it's only after Anton Mercer himself finds a reprieve from mutant dinosaur mode that he's able to save Trent before he could be killed. The interesting thing about the Mercer men is how their arcs are almost complete parallels of each other, but it works, because Trent finishes that arc first, thus allowing him to now be his father's backbone for trying to overcome Mesogog's control, just as Trent found a way to control his Ranger powers. Allow me to briefly deviate from the topic at hand to say that I don't think fathers in Power Rangers are given nearly enough credit. When they are presented as vital side characters, they almost always work to the benefit of the season, from Mr. Collins to Colonel Truman, and even Captain Mitchell to an extent. Fathers, and more specifically, the relationship they have with their Ranger kids, is one of the most underappreciated aspects of the great stories this franchise has been able to tell.
True.
Unfortunately, the only maternal representative on that level is Udana, and that detail didn't add much, if anything, to Mystic Force. To speak more on Mesogog as a villain, I think he represents one of the rare cases where his design matters, and that's because he is very much a product of the genetic tampering Tommy and Anton worked on. It's similar to how Rancic's design matters because he's a product of the genetic imperfection that his time has almost completely weeded out. And even though Mesogog looks physically powerful, he's more of a psychological villain, often using mental abilities and various technologies to punish his underlings and his enemies, which makes sense because it was scientists that brought him to life, one of which he shares a mind with most of the time. I wouldn't call Mesogog an S-tier villain, but he's certainly better than most, and interestingly enough, he loses for good after he loses control. In the season finale, he goes full monster mode, instead of operating in the calculated way he did before then, and that fits well, because it's only after he separates from Anton, a smart and fairly controlled guy as a human, that his temperament starts becoming more erratic, literally tossing his humanity aside for savagery. It doesn't have the same weight as Trakina going insane before her defeat, but it does make some sense that a mutant dinosaur would only lose after essentially becoming more of a dinosaur and less of an evil genius. Getting back to Trent, as I mentioned before, his arc doesn't just end with his release from evil. He still has to face his worst half and deal with constant mistrust issues from his team.
Yeah,
from his
that was
past.
annoying.
And that's to say nothing of the trouble he gets into for keeping his father's truth from the team later on. Trent is a well-conceived character, and Jeffrey Perazzo does a good job playing a kid who balances being mopey with being a hero, and everything regarding his past, including his biological parents dying, makes sense in terms of how his character is presented now. A lot of added Rangers are inherently more interesting because of the story focus they necessitate, and Trent is no exception. And again, he's no Tommy 2.0. His story can't even be confused with the original White Ranger arc, because the idea of mistrust that defines his character makes him almost in complete contrast to Tommy's quick fit on his first team. And all of the various character reactions to his developments are perfectly in line with who they are, thus adding more depth to each character he interacts with, especially Kira. And finally, we reach the legend himself, Dr. Tommy Oliver. I've said before that he works better here as a Ranger mentor than at any other point in his Ranger career, and the reason I say that is because now he does have a history and a backstory that Dino Thunder utilizes to great effect to drive several plot points. It's not just random kid with green tank top appears one day, it's the story of a scientist who was inspired by his former life as a Dragon Zord pilot to make Jurassic Park real, or something. And just like in JP, nothing goes as planned, and there's your central dilemma. And a nice detail about that is the fact that even if you came in knowing nothing about Tommy's legacy, it doesn't preclude you from understanding it. Because for one thing, the Legacy of Power episode has you covered in terms of Ranger history, and nothing about his character now is overly dependent on knowing his past. He comes with a wealth of experience and a sure-minded confidence in both his words and his team that comes naturally. It's a seamless progression from where he left off, and it's easy to believe that given his chosen path, this really is the mature and grown-up Tommy. Although the whole battling his former lives in a coma event doesn't make much sense, but I'll get back to that. You may have noticed that in the case of the Dino Thunder characters, I didn't discuss the themes as much as I would have with other analysis videos. Dino Thunder is fairly unique amongst upper tier seasons because the narrative and the structure creates the themes more so than the characters do. The characters are at least solid and at most great across the board, but that has a lot more to do with how they're presented, which is also similar to the original season. To bring up an example, Jungle Fury needed both Daishi and Casey to properly function, given what they were aiming for thematically. Without their arcs, the season is very different and probably not as good. Conversely, if you were to replace Connor with, let's say, Mac minus his reveal, nothing changes thematically. And that's the case for every character except the Mercerman and Tommy himself, whose inclusion is the biggest reason this Legacy season works so well. But I think in this case, that disconnect might be a good thing, because Dino Thunder gave the main trio plenty of space to be themselves, while also allowing the Mercer men to connect to the also present theme of duality, which naturally connects back to Tommy, whose former evil ways help him understand Trent a lot better. Now let's get back to the mischance I mentioned before concerning Tommy's place in all of this. It seemed like the show was very quick to absolve Tommy of much, if any, blame for the way things are now. His work helped create Mesogog and his foot soldiers, but the season never did enough with that angle.
My fandom, honestly, I think because he was so consumed by trying to revive the Dinozords, the original Dino powers that Zordon gave him, you know, like the Green Ranger and the White Ranger powers that he had, and revive like the Dinozords and all that. I think in order for him to do that, he was trying to use these, like the Dino Gems and this new power to revive it, but something happened and it went too far and it went out of his control. In my fandom, I think that's what happened, and afterwards he just said, okay, well, I gotta deal with this before I go any further and revive the other powers.
Tommy did make it very clear that he never wanted his work to be used this way, but even still, he's certainly not blameless in all of this. And it would have made for a much more compelling personal journey for Tommy to have that definitive what have I done moment, especially since it's his creations that are this season's Putty Patrol, so you'd think that would affect him more, especially given his past experiences with fighting for the wrong side. And now here he is, trying to make scientific breakthroughs to help the world with the unintentional consequence of possibly dooming it again. That's what the Coma battle should have been, an internal struggle of guilt. Tommy's past form should be blaming him for the current threat, while Tommy overcomes that by reaffirming his dedication to all things good. You wouldn't even have to change the story progression to that point, because maybe Tommy was just repressing his guilt until it took subconscious form in his dreams. There was no reason to have Tommy's fight for his life be a fight against his old Ranger forms, except that it creates cool visuals to bring them all back with unique color palettes and have all of them together in the end. But it could have been more than that. This season doesn't have a ton of noteworthy flaws, but I would say this is one of them. At the end of the day, the face of the franchise isn't perfect. Nobody is, not even Carter, so if Dino Thunder had utilized Tommy to better convey how understanding your mistakes and working through them are positives, then we've got an even better season than this already great one. To bring up RPM one more time, that season would not have been the same without that angle defining Dr. K's character, and I feel like it wouldn't have been too hard to better incorporate it here. To touch on the finale for a bit, it was really good and really well executed. I wouldn't call it as thematically powerful as some other better ones, but it just did everything right. And as I mentioned, there was thought put into how Mesogog as a character would eventually get beaten, given who he is and what he later becomes. And I don't know if anyone else felt this way, but the closing minutes of Dino Thunder always made me really sad. It's that same kind of why did this show have to end already sadness that happens every time I watch the closing minutes of Avatar. And Kira performing to cap things off was just a perfect touch. It confirms for me that I just watched a great team, a great season, and a great show. It's one of those things I can't properly analyze because it's more derived from personal feelings, but I think that's fine. After all, I don't make these videos for the sake of cold analytical points. I do it because I love the show I'm discussing. All in all, Dino Thunder is a great season of Power Rangers, and it stands as the only great legacy season. It's a series that knew how to use the past to facilitate the present, not through gimmicks or forced cameos, but through great storytelling, a great sense of humor, and an exceptional understanding of itself. It even went so far as to capture the team watching an episode of Abba Ranger, the Sentai they were based on.
Yeah, that was crazy.
Being an obvious different can still be good, and while that episode was very much filler, it's one of the few filler episodes of any Ranger season that actually builds on the central theme. Because this Ranger team doesn't just understand where they came from, they understand where Rangers as a concept came from. And they learn to respect that, same as they learn about the past Ranger teams. If there was ever a season constructed by people who love Power Rangers and everything it is and represents, it's this one. The theme song says it best. With the force of ages, centuries gone by. Because in point of fact, this franchise does occupy 2 centuries. This team is a force made of distinct ages, and with that comes an expansive history that helps mold these Rangers into heroes. It was mostly subtle references, clever self-aware jokes, and tempered fan service done right. And I'll take that over super mega pandering any day of the week. And that was Dino Thunder, a thematic analysis. For my next Ranger video, we'll be breaking down the top 10 best villains of the franchise. Then, later, we'll discuss Operation Overdrive, and maybe I'll throw a Ninja Steel video in there somewhere since it is back on the air now. And, as always, let me know what season you want to see a video like this for.
Alright. Well, thank you, Disney Brain, for that. But yeah, Dino Thunder is one of those gems. In my opinion, like SPD, Tom Ford's RPM, Lightspeed Rescue. Dino Thunder is a gem, along with those others. And I am happy we got it. I'm happy we had gotten Tommy back. I am happy that, we had gotten a good Ranger team. So yeah. Y'all let me know down below what y'all think about this. If you want me to do any more. This has been Master Sakurai. And I hope you guys have a good day. I will see y'all again next time. I'm out. Peace.
We keep dreaming of a world where all is good, so we were told we need a hero.